I invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to take a break from the politics and from the elections. Let us clear our minds and delve a little bit into this week's Torah portion of Vayera and the tremendous lessons, the relevant and meaning teachings that we could derive from this week's Torah portion. The Torah tells us that Abraham and Sarah were old, coming on in days, which simply means that Abraham and Sarah were getting older. And the question is, why doesn't the Torah simply tell us that Abraham and Sarah were older or getting old? Instead, the Torah tells us Abraham and Sarah were old, coming on in days. And the Zohar explains the words ba'im bayamim could also mean coming with their days, which means to say that Abraham and Sarah came and brought along with them all of the days of their lives. Each day in their life was accounted for. Each day was accomplished, was full of meaning, was full of purpose. They maximized every moment of every day of their lives. It was wholesome, it was meaningful, it was complete. And the question here is that really true? If we look at the history of Abraham and Sarah, that doesn't seem to be the case at all. We know that Abraham searched for the truth and only God. In fact, there are various opinions in the Medrash, in the Talmud. The Medrash tells us that Abraham was 48 years old when he discovered God. Maimonides says that he was 40 years old. And the Talmud cites various sources that say that Abraham was 3 years old, and the same was true for Sarah. Up until the time they discovered Hashem as being the true creator of heaven and earth, the one who orchestrates and controls everything in our world. Before that time, Abraham was steeped in pagan idolatry, as was Sarah, for everybody at that time were doing the same thing. In fact, Abraham's own father, Terach, owned a shop of idols. So how could we possibly say that ba'im bayamim, that Abraham and Sarah took along all of their days, kulam shavim lateva, they were all equally wholesome, complete, and perfect? The Lubavitcher Rebbe explained this by means of a halachic law. We know that when it comes to the obligation of mitzvot, the obligation for a boy begins at the age of 13, for a girl at the age of 12. Girls apparently mature earlier. And the question is, we do not find, according to the strict Torah direction, instruction, or law, any mitzvah, any commandment for the parents to educate these children prior to the age of 12 and 13, prior to their bar and bat mitzvah. How then, on the day of the young girl's bat mitzvah or the boy's bat mitzvah, could they suddenly just swing right into the things and know exactly what to do? How could the boy take the pair of tefillin and wrap it as if he's trained for it? And the same thing is true with the girl for her mitzvot. We know that before the process begins, we have to teach the youngsters the do's and the don'ts. There are 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. How could we possibly expect these youngsters on the day of their bar or bat mitzvah to know exactly how to do the mitzvot properly, according to the instruction of the Torah and according to the strict Torah law? And the answer, my friends, is that from the Torah's perspective, practice, trial, and error are all an integral part and integral components of the mitzvah itself. The Torah doesn't expect the 13 and 12-year-old to know exactly how to do things and to do it perfectly. That's ridiculous. It's impossible. Instead, what the Torah is telling us here is, and in this instruction of how to raise our children, giving them the obligation at the age of 12 and 13, bar bat mitzvah, to all of a sudden start performing the mitzvahs, that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to stumble. It's impossible to go ahead and start performing the mitzvahs 100%. It's not humanly feasible. And yet, that is part and parcel of the process of performing the mitzvot, including the stumbling, including the mistakes that are made. Now, according to the rabbis, the sages, they instituted a concept that was referred to as chinuch, to educate the youngsters so that when they finally turn 12 or 13, they should know exactly how to do and what to do. But according to the strict Torah law, there's no such obligation on the parents to be mechanech, to educate the children to be ready for the mitzvot at the age of 12 and 13. And this is again because, as the Rebbe explains it, the trial, the error, the mistakes, the wrong turns is part and parcel of the mitzvah itself. And the same is true, my friends, for Abraham and Sarah, Avraham and Sarah and their lives. They were born not in an environment of Torah. They introduced the whole concept of monotheism, the belief in one God. But they were surrounded by an environment and by a world that was steeped in pagan idolatry. And throughout their young life as children and young adults, the search for the truth began even while they were serving false idols. And from God's perspective, all their days were perfectly wholesome, even during those years where they were heading down what seemed to be the wrong path, because their mistakes were part of their search for truth. They could never have reached their true conclusion had they not made those mistakes, had they not made those wrong turns. Now let's bring this home a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. You know, sometimes we look back at our lives and we feel dejected. We feel discouraged. I may be in my 40s or 50s, and I may say to myself, if only I had discovered what I know today 30, 40 years ago, 10 or 20 years ago, I could have gone a lot further in life. All those wrong turns, all those foolish thoughts, all those fads or those things that I used to be into, getting caught up with the wrong crowd, or certain moments in my life where I was going through a particular challenge or some adversity that caused me to blunder, that caused me to do things that were not smart. If only. Where would I be today had I not made those wrong turns, or had God directed my path where I am today instead of wasting 10, 20, 30 years? And the answer and the lesson of this week's Torah portion, in the fact that the Torah tells us that Abraham and Sarah came with all of their days as they grew older, and all of their days were full of meaning, of purpose. They didn't waste a second, even though we know the fact of the matter is they did take some wrong turns early on in their lives. They were serving idols until they discovered the truth. They were following what everybody else was doing, including Abraham in terms of following his father's footsteps. And then finally they reached the truth of the one and only God. Because the only way we're able to discover who we truly are, the only way we could discover the path to truth, is through going through this process. In fact, we could take this a step further. It's not despite of, but it's by virtue of the wrong turns that I take in my life. The wrong turns that Abraham and Sarah may have taken in their search to discover the truth. It is all of those blunders and all of those mistakes that made them realize and come to the ultimate true conclusion of the fact that God created and orchestrates everything in our lives, and everything is by divine providence. And therefore, these negative thoughts and negative feelings, if only I had discovered the truth the way I know it today, in 2020, 20, 30 years ago, is ridiculous. Because whatever I know today, it's by virtue of the journey that I've taken over these decades. And because of all of these wrong turns and all of these foolish thoughts that eventually led me to the truth, realizing my mistakes, that's why I am who I am today. And I could take these thoughts further with me in my lives as I go through the various challenges, navigating the difficulties that lie ahead. Wishing you a beautiful weekend, a Shabbat Shalom. Until next time.